The focus group is the 23rd episode of the 3rd season of Frasier. This was directed by Philip Charles MacKenzie, and there will be spoilers from now as I talk about what happens in this episode and share some thoughts along the way. Interestingly, this is not a personal favourite. I don't think it's that funny. There's not a lot of variety to it, but it has one of my favourite moments in it, so it's definitely quite balanced. But in general, it is a good episode. It starts off with Daphne feeling not great because it's her 6-month anniversary with Joe, but he's decided to go to Las Vegas with the guys. And Niles comes over and he's having some problems with art that he got dirty. And then Frasier comes over and is concerned because they're having a focus group at KACL. So a lot of things are established very quickly in the first scene. And then we have a scene that, well, in the same scene, we have a moment that I think is quite spectacular, actually, because it's full of emotion and something very different to what we see, and it's different for 2 reasons. Niles and Daphne get into an argument, and they are shouting at each other and hurling insults and comments. And it's great for 2 reasons. Well, 3 reasons. The first is that the performance is absolutely brilliant, and it's very well done. But the other 2 reasons. 1, Daphne would never really... I mean, she does occasionally, of course, but in general, Daphne doesn't want to speak out of turn against her employer or indeed her employer's brother. So it's unusual for her to be speaking like that to Niles. And Niles, as we know, is besotted with Daphne. He would never do anything to hurt her or upset her. And here we have him shouting at her. And that's quite different as well. But as we learn immediately after, he loved it. He loved the adrenaline rush of arguing with Daphne. And we come back to that a little later on. But first of all, we have the focus group. And I don't know if this is a common thing, but I don't agree with the fact that Frasier and Roz were on one side of the 2-way mirror and the focus group were on the other side, unaware, of course, that it's a 2-way mirror. I've never been part of a focus group, but I genuinely, particularly after watching this episode, but I'd genuinely be concerned about speaking the truth if I feared that somebody whose feelings could be hurt was watching from a 2-way mirror. That's not to say I don't speak the truth when I'm doing reviews, for example, like this one. I am completely honest. I don't pretend to think something I don't. But as we see with one character in this, he wasn't really willing to say that he didn't like Frasier until some of the other characters kind of encouraged him and, well, forced him to say how he felt. And eventually he said that he just didn't like Frasier. And Frasier's response is exactly why, in that situation, if there is a mirror in the room, I would just be concerned with directly hurting somebody's feelings. Of course, there are tactful ways of doing things, and the guy who said he didn't like Frasier wasn't necessarily tactful, or at least he wasn't very helpful, because he couldn't really expand on it. He just didn't like Frasier, and he didn't really know why, which is fair. People sometimes dislike people for no known reason, but when you're in a focus group, that's not really the most helpful thing to say, and that really eats away at Frasier. So we get back to Frasier in a moment, but first of all, we're back at the apartment with Niles, and it actually took me a second to realise what Niles was doing. I have seen this episode before, but I couldn't remember the bulk of it very well, but the ending I did, but I'll get to that when we get there. And it took me a second to realise what Niles was doing, because Martin tells Niles Daphne's still feeling sensitive about the whole Joe thing, don't upset her. And she's eating some chips, and Niles says to her, and I quote, "Many chips make for chubby hips, waddle, waddle, waddle." And it wasn't until kind of the 3rd waddle that I realised he was trying to provoke her and that he was trying to start another argument with her. But Daphne was just kind of accepting everything he was saying. It was just completely backfiring on him, and throughout this scene, he kept trying different things to provoke her into an argument, and it was very well done, and I rather enjoyed it, and I particularly liked the fact that Daphne was constantly agreeing with what he was saying rather than getting riled by it, which I thought worked very well. Then Frasier comes in and is, of course, really unhappy about the way things went, And he reveals that actually 11 out of the 12 people there liked him. And Martin asks him, why is he so bothered about this one person? And he was the same as a kid. If he had one bad review out of many, and there was an example of a review from Bye Bye Birdie, it really got to him. And that's unreasonable. I think Frasier's actions are kind of unreasonable, but it is very true that you can have 100 positive reviews, good feedback, and you will remember the one negative one. You'll remember the one that made you feel unhappy, and this is exactly what's happening with Frasier. But it's not just that it was a negative feedback; it's the fact that there was no explanation given, and I think that would annoy me. If somebody said, "I don't like you because your accent is stupid," you've got a point. But if somebody said, "I don't like you," and they didn't expand on it, I'd be really annoyed. Probably not to the extent that Frasier is, but I can see where he is coming from. And he decides to take action. Niles, Martin, and Frasier are meant to be going out to eat, but Frasier makes them stop off just outside a newspaper stand. And it just so happens that the newspaper stand is owned by the guy who said he didn't like him. So Frasier makes Martin go up to the newspaper stand to fake a conversation about that Frasier from the radio. And I love what Martin did. I love the fact that it's raining, because I love the rain. And Martin walked up and just asked him bluntly, my son's in the car, he made me come out here, why don't you like him? And I just thought that's exactly the way I expected it to go with Martin. It was tremendous fun, and I liked the way it played out. He said he was annoying. Martin goes back to the car. Frasier is not happy with the response, so Frasier goes to confront him. And while he's there, he gets a little bit more of an answer, and he's about to leave, and then disaster happens, and it ultimately ends up with Frasier looking after the newspaper stand. And this is the bit that I remember very well from the first time I watched it. The newspaper stand ends up burning down. So things just went from worse for everybody. If that doesn't put you off being in a focus group, I don't know what would. I think focus groups can be exceptionally helpful and really beneficial, but in this situation, that's the case. But it is a good episode. Certainly there's nothing about it, in my opinion, that work. But as I said, it's maybe not as funny as some, but we have some really great performances, and the bit with the newspaper stand I just thought was so memorable, and absolutely, it has to be one of my favourite Frasier moments. Really thoroughly enjoyed that bit. So altogether, the focus group is not a bad episode, and I don't know if I would choose this. If I'm in the mood to watch a Frasier episode, would I choose this one? I think there are many I'd choose before this one, but if I was binge watching this season, I wouldn't skip it. I certainly wouldn't skip it. The focus group is definitely not too bad.